Thor Love and Thunder's teaser trailer has got a lot of us here at CBR thinking about gods as of late, and Moon Knight has us thinking more specifically about the Egyptian gods. So I figured that now would be a good time to explore a few members of that ancient pantheon, and take a look at how their comic versions have impacted events on the page over the years. So here we go. In this video, I'm not going to take a look at all of the Egyptian gods, but I will tell you about a handful of the most noteworthy. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and dive right into it. Within most of the earthly pantheons, the most powerful members tend to be the ones who started it all, or at the very least the ones who rule over them. For the Asgardians, there is Odin. For the Olympians, Zeus. And for those who call celestial Heliopolis home, the Ennead, there is Atum, or as he is more commonly called, Amun-Ra. Now before we get too deep into this, I just want to clarify something. I did actually look up how to pronounce all these names. However, for pretty much all of the gods, there's like 8 or 9 different ways you could say their name, so it's sort of hard to pin down one specific way to pronounce it. So if I mispronounce something, hopefully you can cut me at least a little bit of slack. I'd really appreciate it if you did. Anyways, Ra is the Egyptian god of the sun, and the so-called king of the gods. He is the creator god, the progenitor of the entire Ennead race, as well as a member of the Council of Godheads, a loosely connected group of gods from all the pantheons on Earth who share information and resources amongst each other in order to take on threats that individual pantheons can't deal with on their own. Ra, however, like many other members of the Egyptian pantheon, can't enter the earthly plane anymore. He can't step foot on Earth. So instead, he lives on the sun, and utilizes a champion called the Sun King to enact his will amongst the mortals. And yes, before you ask, the Sun Kings and the Moon Knights have come into direct confrontation on a few occasions. In fact, pretty much all of the Sun Kings that we've heard about in the comics have ultimately met their end at the hands of a Moon Knight. But this list is about the power of the gods themselves, not their agents. Hence why Ra is at the top of the list, and Khonshu is not. He's not too far off though. Spoiler alert. While Amun-Ra is often seen as a force of creation, the jackal-headed Anubis is sort of the opposite. The god of death and destruction, funeral rites, and the afterlife, his main role was to serve as a guide for souls as they made their way into Duat, the Heliopolitan realm of the dead. If you're kind of confused by this, I can't really say that I blame you. As someone not super familiar with Egyptian mythology, I thought that Osiris was the god of death, not Anubis. And he was, actually. Within Egyptian history, over the years, worship of Osiris rose in popularity. So much so that eventually Osiris actually wound up taking over as the main god of death in the afterlife, relegating Anubis to being a bit of a lesser god. In Marvel Comics though, Anubis served the storylines as a bit of an antagonist within the Pantheon, attempting to usurp Ra as the leader of the Ennead by cutting out his heart and absorbing his power. However, Bast the Panther god intervened, taking his heart to the middle of Africa, leading to the founding of the city of Necropolis within the borders of Wakanda. You'll actually see quite a bit of crossover with the Wakandan pantheon in this video, mainly because a lot of their gods are actually the same beings as those within the Egyptian pantheon, just interpreted through a different cultural lens. But let's get back to the comic book stuff before I turn this into a 4.5 hour long lecture on cultural anthropology. As much fun as that would probably be for me. It always seems like the major pantheons have their own younger member whose whole shtick is just being the butt kicker who goes out and goes on all kinds of crazy adventures. And so it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that this entry is the one for the Ennead. Horus. The son of Osiris and Isis and the grandson of Amun-Ra, Horus is the Egyptian god of justice and retribution, which might just be the most badass thing one can be a god of. Wielding a bladed staff that he uses to channel his powers into immense energy blasts, Horus is easily the most well-traveled of the Egyptian gods, having spent a great amount of time on Earth, and even having teamed up with heroes such as Thor on a few occasions. Though the majority of the stories that we read about him in the comics involve some kind of family conflict, usually involving his uncle Seth, with whom he has fought many battles. Gee, I wonder who could be the next one on the list. Seth, the serpent god. A being pretty much on par with Horus in regards to power level, despite the fact that he almost always loses to him in combat. He can summon forth and manipulate hellfire, which is pretty neat. However, despite perpetually losing, he gets to be this high up on the list for something that he did in the past. Something that has gone on to cause a metric crap ton of trouble for pretty much everyone in Marvel Comics universe. I'm talking, of course, about his relationship with En-Sabah-Nur, aka Apocalypse. Around 2950 BCE, Seth appeared to a young Apocalypse in the form of a statue and told him about his destiny, setting the boy on a path that led him to become one of the most powerful villains in comic history. Basically, if Seth didn't do that, huge swath of X-Men comic storylines just straight up would not have happened. And we might have gotten a slightly better third film in the new era X-Men movies. Or we might have gotten Dark Phoenix slightly earlier, which might have actually made that movie worse than it already is. Well, that's rough to think about. You knew that I was going to include Khonshu on here somewhere, considering the fact that this video's very existence was prompted by the Moon Knight series. That and the fact that I told you that he was going to be on this list in the first entry. There is that. Khonshu is the Egyptian god of the moon. Within the mythology from the real world, he is actually one of a small handful of moon gods, specifically representing the travel of the celestial body across the sky. In the comics, he is referred to as the moon god. However, his real-world interpretation is represented a slight bit on the page, as he is said to be the protector of travelers and shepherd of the lost. As is the case with Amun-Ra, Khonshu cannot physically step foot on the earthly realm, so he instead imbues champions with some of his power, transforming them into the Fist of Khonshu, the Moon Knight. He also seems to favor people who suffer from mental illness for this role, probably because he finds them easier to break and fully control, if I had to venture a guess. It was one of these Moon Knights that led to his eventual defeat, however, as Mark Spector was once infused with the power of the Phoenix, which he used to take Khonshu down during the Age of Khonshu story arc. From there, Khonshu was imprisoned in the dungeons of Asgard, which I'd assume would be a pretty good place to put him, since I'd imagine a prison built by gods would be able to hold a god. I wonder if we'll ever see something like that in the MCU. The relationship between Spector and Khonshu is already being presented to us as fairly antagonistic, so it wouldn't really surprise me if that's what they're building towards. Just give them time. Bast, the patron goddess of the Panther tribe of Wakanda, and one of the oldest members of the Ennead people. In Egypt, Bast was worshipped as the goddess of pleasure, and the one who protected people against diseases and infection. She's also the reason why cats were mummified and buried alongside prominent members of Egyptian society. Fun fact. However, we all know what Bast is really known for, what her impact on Marvel Comics really has been, as she is the one who imbues part of her power upon mortals, transforming them into the Black Panther. This happened the first time many millennia ago, when the vibranium meteorite fell to Earth, landing in the heart of Wakanda. Many people went to investigate, and some of them were twisted and transformed by the radiation that the stone gave off into horrible monsters. Bashenga, the mightiest warrior of the Panther tribe, prayed to Bast to grant him the strength to take on these demon spirits, becoming the first Black Panther. Well, okay, not the first. The first avatar of Bast actually appeared at some point in prehistoric times and served as a member of the prehistoric Avengers. But Bashenga was the first recorded one, the one that started the lineage that is still followed today. So in a way, when you think about it, Black Panther is kind of in the same category as Moon Knight and Sun King, avatars who are granted power by an Ennead god. It would be kind of cool to see the comics or shows or movies or whatever acknowledge this connection at some point. Maybe throw them all together on a team. That could be cool. Since I talked about Osiris and Horus already, you had to know that Isis, the wife to Osiris and mother of Horus, was going to be on here somewhere. Isis is the Egyptian goddess of fertility, and the one who taught humanity how to utilize medicine and domesticate animals, both of which being responsible for saving countless lives across the eons. However, she makes this list solely for her magical abilities. As a powerful sorceress, she was able to resurrect her husband after Seth murdered and dismembered him, which is no easy feat. Despite the fact that people come back from the dead nearly constantly within comics, just kind of ignore that part. Though, in fairness, how many of those people who come back are gods? It's not super common in that regard. Unless they're Loki. Or Odin. You know what, it's probably not that impressive now that I think about it. Sobek here actually has a lot in common with Bast the Panther God. He's a member of the Egyptian Pantheon who managed to become a revered being within Wakandan culture as well. And he even has his own chosen champion from among them. However, this crocodile cult champion isn't anyone of any sort of note. In fact, the only noteworthy thing this guy ever did in the comics was get his butt whooped by the lion cult champion before getting the chance to challenge Black Panther for the Wakandan throne. So, you know, not a great look for old Sobek. However, this reptile-faced god still demands at least a modicum of respect, if for no other reason than the fact that he is one of the oldest members of the Egyptian Pantheon, who has managed to keep on kicking all these eons later. Thoth here might not be the most well-known god within the Egyptian Pantheon, but this bird-headed Ennead, the brother of Amun-Ra, serves a pretty big purpose within the comics. At one point, Thoth served as the leader of the Ennead when Osiris and his family were sealed away, meaning that at least for a little while, he was technically the head of the Pantheon. And within Wakanda, it was theorized for quite a while that Thoth was the basis for the gorilla god. It was actually proven though that Thoth wasn't the gorilla god. It was actually Gekre from the Vodou Pantheon, but that's neither here nor there. These days, Thoth serves alongside Anubis at the gates of Duat, that Egyptian land of the dead that I mentioned earlier. There, while Anubis is weighing someone's mortal soul to see if they should be allowed passage into the realm, Thoth records the results, keeping tabs on who is going where. And if someone isn't found worthy, they get eaten by the bestial pet of our final entry. Finally, I wanted to give a bit of a shout out to someone who is a member of the Pantheon, but not actually an Ennead, that being Ma'at, or as she is more commonly known, Ashtur of the Vishanti. Worshipped by ancient Egyptians as the goddess of truth, she is largely responsible for the use of magic amongst humans, having given birth to Agamotto, the first Sorcerer Supreme, as well as having trained him in the mystical arts. You know the guy, the dude whose name is on that dope necklace that Doctor Strange wears and keeps the time stone in. That one. He was also a member of the prehistoric Avengers, alongside that ancient Black Panther that I mentioned earlier. So yeah, while her most noteworthy accomplishment has nothing to do with her place among the Egyptian gods, I still think that it was worth bringing up as she is such a fundamental part of the history of Marvel Comics. I mean, without Agamotto, we wouldn't have sorcerers, so it's kind of a big deal. Hey there everybody, I'm John Aljets. I made this video and I want to know what you think. How would you rank the Egyptian gods? Be sure to let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, or go ahead and shoot me a response over on Twitter. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to CBR for more great videos just like this in the future.